Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm proud to be the founder of campaign group Transparency Task Force. We are a UK-based but very international campaign organisation. We're a social enterprise here in the UK, which means that we exist for purpose, not for profit. And our formal mission is to promote reform of the financial sector so it serves society better. So that's what we're all about. From time to time, we run what we call book club events, where, of course, we take time to listen to and talk to the author of a book. That's what we're doing today. We're going to be speaking with and listening to John Y. Campbell, who, along with his colleague Taran Ramadrai, has written Why Personal Finance is Broken and How to Make It Work for Everyone. Now, this is particularly interesting to me, this topic, because way back on the 18th of August 1986, I became a trainee financial advisor and started out on a career in financial services. I was trained to advise, or I should say, sell to ordinary retail investors, retail customers, life assurance products, savings products, investment products, pension products. And it was a bit like the Wild West. Back in 86, there was no real regulation in the UK. Pretty much every organization had a tied sales force. And to be frank with you, at the time, the real mission was maximizing sales, maximizing profits, and taking care of the client properly was pretty much a secondary consideration. I'm proud to say and pleased to say that I quickly developed into a management role, built various sales teams, branches, regions, ended up running one or two national operations, and I never had a bad complaint against me or the people that I was responsible for. But the honest truth of the matter is this. I did work for organizations that were doing things that were suboptimal. You might call them dodgy. On three occasions, I reported what I was witnessing to the relevant compliance departments. And in all three of those occasions, I ended up leaving the organizations in a state of frankly disgust about the attitude they displayed through focusing on profit rather than client needs. Over a long period of time, I came to the conclusion that real commercial success in the financial sector must be built around serving the client's needs. So when we came across the book, Why Personal Finance is Broken and How to Make It Work for Everyone, that resonated strongly. The title of the book is fixed, and it's all about the idea that there's a better way of doing things than is being done at the moment. It's great that we've got Mr. John Y. Campbell with us. John is the Morton L. and Carol S. Alton Professor of Economics at Harvard University, which is where he is right now. And he's taught there since 1994. John has published over 100 articles on various aspects of finance and macroeconomics, including fixed income securities, equity valuation, portfolio choice, and household finance. His books include Fix, which is the book we're talking about tonight, and how it make personal finance is broken and how to make it work for everyone, along with Taran Ramadrai, who is Princeton University Press 2025 publishing. Financial Decisions and Markets, a course in asset pricing, the Squam Lake Report, Fixing the Financial System, with the Squam Lake Group of Financial Economists. Please do tell us more about Squam Lake, please. I've come across it once in the past, John, but it'll be fascinating to hear more about it. He's also written the book Strategic Asset Allocation, Portfolio Choice for Long-Term Investors, and the Econometrics of Financial Markets with colleagues. So clearly, John Y. Campbell has tremendous expertise in this space, and we are extremely grateful to him for taking time to be with us today. I hope that sets the scene, folks. The format's going to be John talking about his book for 15, 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to be opening up to comments and questions from others, and we'll be wrapping up in roughly 52 minutes' time. Mr. John Campbell, thank you very much for being with us. Can we please, folks, start off by welcoming John and thanking him for his participation at our event today? Thank you very much indeed, sir. Over to you, Mr. John Y. Campbell. Tell us
Great.
about Fixed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if this works. All right.
All good.
So I'm going to try not to get bogged down in a whole bunch of slides. Um, here's the cover image of the book. Um, Before I get into it, Andy, you asked, what was the itch that I was trying to scratch? Well, for over 20 years, going on 25 years now, I've been studying how ordinary individuals, ordinary people use the financial system. We've learned a lot more about that. Academic economists have wonderful models we can use to give advice. What should you do? Normative models of what people should do. But we've also been able now to measure what people actually do in great detail, thanks to the use of administrative data, where, we go to brokerage firms or we go to governments that are collecting wealth taxes, or we go to administrative records and we can see what millions of people are doing. Um, and unfortunately, we've learned that there's all kinds of things going on that really make no sense from the standpoint of our normative models. People are messing up. And the question is, why is that? And should we just take that for granted? Or, if not, what should we do about it? Tarun is a longtime co-author of mine, friend, former student, teaches in London, just moved to the LSE, but grew up in India. I grew up in the UK. So between us, we have a bit of a global perspective, and the book really does try to talk about the world as a whole, not just the US or the UK. Um, what's the motivation? We start the book with some horror stories about ordinary people who have just terrible things happen to them. Renata Keynes is a young woman who borrowed too much for her education and dropped out and ended up with terrible debt with no college degree. George Maddox, retired executive of Enron, put all his money in Enron. The company collapsed. He lost his retirement savings and was left in poverty. Ruth Putnam put all her money in bank CDs, and then interest rates fell, and she was left in poverty in retirement. Um, Simon Shipley, a British victim of the infamous PPI cross-selling scandal, and Virendra Pal Kapoor, an Indian botanist, actually, who was a victim of another type of cross-selling between insurance and investments that turned out to be a massive rip-off that consumed his life savings. So we tell these 5 stories at the start of the book, and then we say, well, are these just anecdotes? No, they're not. This kind of thing, these, of course, are the most extreme cases, but actually, problems like this are occurring all the time. They typically worst affect people with less education, less income, less wealth, and are particularly destructive for people in the emerging global middle class. We're thinking of the billions of people in countries like China and India who have emerged from rural poverty but are using formal finance for the first time and are very inexperienced and fall victim to these sorts of problems. What this does is it helps to make finance remarkably unpopular. And we're very concerned about that because finance is absolutely vital to capitalism. Finance is the nerve system of a modern financial economy. It's what controls the allocation of resources, and we all depend on it in our lives to maintain the course of a modern life. And yet, financial firms are about as unpopular as social media companies, which is saying something these days. Um, and we think it's actually undermining support for the market economy in general. So we need to do something is the theme of this slide. This is a figure from the first chapter of the book showing the emergence of a global middle class, which I referred to. This is the global income distribution, and the red area is Asia, and the left is 1975, the right is 2015, and you can see what's happened, that there's a tremendous group of people now in the world population who have enough money that they need formal financial products and are using them, but are not experienced at doing so. So this is a worldwide problem on an enormous scale that influences billions, literally billions of people. Um, this is another figure. We don't have any tables or numbers in the book, but we have some figures. This is one that shows the impact of the finance system on inequality. And the message of the figure is that if you go to a country like Sweden, where you have a lot of data on the entire population, and you look from the poorest at the left to the richest at the right, and you measure the returns that they get on their investments and the cost that they pay on their debt, the rich earn higher returns on their wealth. That's the blue and red lines that are rising up. And the rich pay less when they borrow. That's the gray line that's sloping down. And the difference is enormous. We're talking, as much as 8 percentage points. So this is enough. This difference is enough to contribute meaningfully to the evolution of wealth inequality, which is a major concern in the world today. Okay, so just to give you the outline of the book, part one gives the problem at a high level. And, if I don't get to do much more than explain that's a start. Part two is a lot of details, and I'll probably skip that in the interest of time. And part three is what we propose for a solution. Okay, so what's the problem? So, why do people find financial decisions so difficult? Well, basically, we're not wired as human beings to do the sorts of intertemporal and statistical decision making that finance requires. Our intuition fails. We need calculations. But most people hate doing math, are not very good at it. So we do things intuitively. We extrapolate from a small sample of what we ourselves have experienced. We anchor on big numbers. We fail to understand exponential growth. And the usual ways we learn from our own experiences or from others fail because, you can learn not to touch a hot stove because it hurts, but it hurts immediately. If you make a financial mistake, well, you may end up in poverty in retirement, but that's going to be decades later, and you don't have the time to learn or learn soon enough. And social learning, similarly, we like to learn from others, from our friends, from people we talk to. But if the whole economy is experiencing a housing boom, everyone we talk to is going to say, great, buy a house, lever up to the max. You can't go wrong. And nobody will learn until the housing boom comes to an end. It's also true, of course, that people don't talk honestly about money. People boast of their successes, but don't admit to their failures. And then beyond all these cognitive problems, we are tempted to privilege the present over the future. We like to procrastinate, put off painful things like thinking about our finances, and we don't save enough. We just don't give enough weight to the future. So at the end of the day, most people are taking financial decisions only intermittently, ignoring their finances most of the time. And when we do take decisions, we do so emotionally. Now, the chapter where we explain all this draws on a big academic literature in behavioral economics, behavioral finance, which in turn draws on psychology. This is not novel to us. Where I think the book really makes a contribution is the next chapter, where we talk about how these mistakes that people make corrupt capitalism, and in particular corrupt the financial sector. Why? Because people make mistakes. They don't correctly perceive the benefits of financial products. So, for example, take an annuity. That's an insurance policy. It protects you against outliving your resources. But people think of it as a risky investment, so they misperceive it. They misperceive costs. They don't appreciate how expensive it's going to be to pay overdraft fees on a bank account, for example, or a late fee on a credit card. People hate to shop. They don't search. They don't shop around. Many people like to shop for, clothing, but very few people like to shop for financial products. And then finally, people mismanage products once they've bought them. We don't, for example, reliably refinance our mortgages to renew the teaser rate in the UK. Well, does capitalism correct these errors? No, because capitalists supply the products demanded, not those that objectively serve the interests of customers. So we make an analogy with the pharmaceutical marketplace before medical regulation, when you could sell snake oil and there was a lot of demand for snake oil. You got competition to lower the price of snake oil, but that didn't mean that it was healthy medicine. The existence of market power, because people hate to shop, means that financial firms have an incentive to compete by branding rather than by improving quality. So you get free entry in branding, you get too many bank branches, you get too many realtors. And there's an incentive to make shopping even harder by bundling products together into complex packages that make it very hard to do the comparison shopping that people really should be doing. So we think of the personal finance system as a race between or a toxic interaction between mistakes and complexity. People make mistakes. That induces the industry to supply complex products that reinforce the mistakes. And round it goes. We have a vicious circle. Now, one of the things that's very troubling about this is that the good deal that more sophisticated customers can get is often based on somebody else's bad deal. So product mismanagement creates revenue for the industry, but the industry is competing. So part of the benefit is passed on to all customers in the form of lower prices up front. So think about overdraft fees on checking accounts, which are more often paid by poor people who inadvertently perhaps overdraft their accounts. They pay these fees, which correspond to very high APR loans. And this gives banks revenue that they can use to offer free checking accounts. So I get a free checking account because poor people are paying late fees. Similarly, the late fees on credit cards help to subsidize the airline frequent flyer credit card that I use, and I get frequent flyer miles on the back of other people's late fees. In the US, there's very troubling evidence that Black and Hispanic mortgage borrowers refinance more slowly. So even though they're offered the same rates at origination, they end up paying higher rates because they have old, expensive mortgages. Some of that revenue lowers mortgage rates up front. So I'm a savvy white borrower and I pay less because other people are paying more. Life insurance, people who lapse pay premiums at a time when they are young and healthy. It's a very bad deal for them. It lowers rates for those who keep their life insurance in force. So once you see this, you see it everywhere, and I find it very troubling. I think it's something we shouldn't be tolerant of. It's also true that many people are naive about conflicts of interest. They don't understand who's paying the bill for the nice salesman on the other side of the counter. Many people think that if they're longtime customers of a bank or insurance company, they're going to be treated the best because they're a longtime customer. Actually, they're going to be treated the worst because they've shown that they're not shopping around. And yet, when people do figure this out, perhaps late in the day, they become very angry and mistrustful. And this is what we think contributes to the unpopularity of the financial industry. Now, when that happens, some people try to escape the formal financial system. Maybe they put their money under the mattress, but then they earn no interest. Or maybe they borrow from family and friends, or money lenders and loan sharks in many emerging countries. Or they might invest in crypto. The part of the appeal of crypto is that it's, you're escaping the formal financial system. The problem, we think, is that all of these alternatives are worse. People are jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. And we need a formal financial system in order to run a modern economy and allocate capital to its most productive uses. So we think we have a huge problem. Now, the middle of the book is specifics. I'm not going to spend time going through all this. I'll skip these slides, but just to give you the idea, there are 4 chapters that break the financial industry into 4 broad functions. One is short-term saving, borrowing, managing the ups and downs of life. The chapter 5 is about making large investments, and we highlight education, particularly in countries where you have to pay a lot for education, like the US and increasingly the UK. And then, of course, housing. So we talk about mortgages. Chapter 6 is called Living with Risk. We talk about investments and insurance. And, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So we try to use academic expected utility theory, which is the framework that academics use we try to put that in plain English and use it to explain the principles you should use to think about risk. I don't know whether we succeed, but we give it a go. And chapter 7 is securing retirement. So this is about the life cycle, saving for retirement, and then, of course, running down your assets once you are actually retired. So skipping ahead, though, in the interest of time, let me skip slides on that. Let me talk about the solution. What are we going to do about this? We have 3 chapters on this. The chapter 8 about technology basically says technology is helpful, but it's a double-edged sword. It's also dangerous, and it isn't going to solve the problem by itself. Chapter 9 says, actually, the very popular light touch approach known as nudge, where you give people a nice, good default choice, but you let them opt out at very low cost, that is not enough either. That is weak medicine. There needs to be something stronger. We call it shove rather than nudge. And then chapter 10 goes into some details about exactly what we think we should be aiming for. So, on technology, we're fans of fintech. We think it can lower the costs of providing financial products to small, people with small amounts of money. And it can help customize products. But it can also be used the other way to target people's weaknesses, for example, by gamifying stock trading or by using personal data that people leave around the internet to price discriminate, offer a higher price to somebody who is a less aggressive shopper. You can get around regulation with technology, and you can write algorithms that, even if they never look at forbidden topics like race, can in effect racially discriminate. So, technology, good thing, but not enough by itself. We also don't think financial education is enough. We're big on financial education. I'm very involved in it myself, but it gets obsolete very quickly because the industry is always innovating. And it really needs to be delivered close to the time when it's used. You can't really hope to educate people once and for all when they're in high school and then have them apply the lessons years later. I mean, just think, what would driver's education be like if high school students just sat in a classroom and learned about driving without ever driving a car? They wouldn't learn much. And too often, financial education in high school can be like that. And then we say, well, nudges in certain domains have been successful, but actually the academic literature more recently has found that not quite as good as originally sold. That approach has been oversold. So we think not nudge, but instead shove. Now, before the government gets to shoving, it should take care of the basics. We need to make sure that we have the right financial infrastructure, things like digital IDs, a good payment system, electronic ownership registries. Disclosure policy can be helpful. The key is to design disclosures so people can understand them, and we have some discussion of that. But then we think you got to go beyond. You got to have intervention, and we're actually supporters of the integrated consumer financial protection agencies that emerged about 15 years ago after the financial crisis, including the CFPB in the US and the FCA in the UK. We think these regulators need to have tools to change prices, taxes, subsidies, price caps if necessary, impose costs on providers, or maybe reduce costs by offering, for example, litigation safe harbor, and tools to regulate product access. These regulators also should be able to act on complaints. And we talk about the fact that complaints about credit reports are very dominant in the US. So that's an area that needs some action. Now, as you know, if you're following events um, either in the US or the UK, there's actually a backlash against consumer regulation at the moment. In the US, it's because the Trump administration is opposed to regulation in general. But the UK has a center-left government that is also rolling back consumer financial protection in the name of growth. Now, in my view, that's because the regulation that was brought in about 15 years ago had two problems. One, there was a confusion between financial stability regulation and consumer financial protection. Those were sort of mixed together at the time, but they're really different rationales. And just because we might be less interested in or less worried about financial stability now doesn't mean we should be less worried about consumer protection. The other thing that I think went wrong is that the consumer regulators came too close to imposing a fiduciary duty on the whole financial sector. The FCA's consumer duty really came too close to that. And it's a backward-looking approach where you say essentially to the industry, look, you have to be nice to your customers. We're going to define after the fact what nice means. And if we decide you were not nice, then we're going to come in and fine you, damage your franchise, etc. And the industry hates this, and I can sort of understand why they hate it. The business people like to have clear rules that they play with, that are specified in advance. So our approach that we lay out in the last chapter is to have a rather different concept of consumer financial regulation, which is forward-looking and design-focused. So what do we mean? We think that regulators need to specify a set of financial products that we call the starter kit that are simple, safe, cheap, and easy. I know it sounds like four of the Disney Seven Dwarfs, but simple, cheap, safe, and easy should be the design principles. And the analogy is with sporting equipment that you'd better have before you go out on a playing field if you're going to be safe and competitive. Our idea is that in each financial product category, it should be mandatory for firms in that segment of the industry to offer these products, although they can also offer other products. The designs of the products should be standardized, specified by regulators, with price structures that are simple to facilitate comparison shopping and that are easy to manage after purchase. In some cases, though not all, these products should also be mandatory for consumers to buy or to choose from. So some examples may help to explain what we mean. So transaction costs that pay money market interest with explicit fees. So people think checking accounts are free because there's no annual fee, but of course they're not free. You're giving up interest. But depending on the market interest rate, they may be more or less expensive, but people don't perceive that. So in order to help them perceive the cost, you want to have the accounts pay interest and then charge the fees explicitly. Jumping down here, mortgages. We want to get rid of confusing features in mortgages. In the UK, the scandal is teaser rates that require incessant refinancing that savvy people know how to do and others fail to do. There's no reason why adjustable rate mortgages have to have teaser rates. In the US, the equivalent institution is Points, which is a very weird US-specific mortgage institution that confuses people the same way. Looking at retirement accounts, the big problem in the US is the multiplication of retirement accounts with different terms. Many people have more than one, or they change jobs, they roll their money out. It's a mess. We advocate a single retirement account with automatic enrollment at the date of first employment, which is the system they have in Australia that works really very well. These are just examples. The big vision here, though, is that it should be shopping for financial products should be as easy as shopping for a painkiller when you have a headache. When you go into the chemist or the pharmacy, you go to a shelf that says painkillers, and there's, ibuprofen, and there's the brand name, and there's the generic bottles, and they're all next to each other on the shelf. They have the same active ingredients, the same dosage. You're going to take two pills either way. There's a little label on the shelf that tells you the price per dose, and it's very easy to shop. And we want to make shopping for financial products much more like that. And that will help capitalism do what it's supposed to, which is improve quality and lower costs. Now, we try to be realists. What's going to happen depends on the election cycle, the political cycle, the wheel of fortune turns. We're not going to get any consumer financial regulation right now in the US. And in the UK, I think it's a little bit of a rearguard action also at present. But different parts of the world are in different phases of this cycle. And we also acknowledge that different countries are different in other ways. Some economic fundamentals differ, financial systems differ, cultural attitudes differ. So we're not trying to impose a single system on the whole world. Um, but we do think that thinking about the design principles of personal finance and focusing on simple, safe, cheap and easy is really important because these problems in personal finance are so serious that they're undermining support for capitalism itself, and the market economy itself. Even in the US, if you look at the Republican Party today in the US, it's far less market oriented than it used to be, and that's a development I'm very concerned about. So our goal in the book is to raise awareness of how widespread these problems are around the world, how important they are, and the benefits potentially available from intelligent design, which can involve looking around the world, seeing what works well, and carrying best practices across borders. So why don't I stop there and see what questions you may have?
That's fantastic, John. Thank you very, very much indeed. That was all very interesting. And you've done a superb job giving us a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the thinking that's clearly expressed in the book. In a short while, folks, we're going to invite Steve Conley to share his thoughts and reflections on what's been discussed and said, then to John Ashton, then to Alla Kobliakova, and then to Molly Painter. It'll be great to get their perspectives on what's been discussed. But if I may, I'm going to put a few thoughts to you myself just to see how your thinking is around some, I think, pretty fundamental questions, please, John. Um, I find the way that you balance um, the idea that the market should be structured in a certain way with, for example, simple, cheap, safe, and easy products that have a kind of mandated DNA to them. My words, not yours. I find it really fascinating how you frame that idea, market intervention, with the idea that that market intervention is actually promoting free markets and the working of the economy as opposed to in some way getting in the way of it. So let's just play a what if, okay? If I was Friedrich Hayek or Milton Friedman, for example, and I said to you, John, this is awful. You're talking about interfering in the market, and the one thing you must not do is interfere with the market. The free hand knows everything. The free hand will find the efficiencies. Why are you proposing something that's just going to get in the way of all that and add friction to the system unnecessarily? What would your response be to somebody who had a Hayekish or a Friedmanite type free market mindset? How would you justify what they would perceive as interference with the market? Thank you, John.
Great question, Andy. And I think I would say that um, I am being anti-Hayekian, anti-Friedmanite, in that I am willing to be at least a little bit paternalist and say
Uh-huh.
that I can identify cases where people are not acting in their own best interest. And I could refer to, there's a wide range of evidence. Some of the strongest evidence is the really unambiguous mistakes, where people leave money on the table, literally
Yeah,
leave money on the table.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like buy a health insurance plan that's dominated in the sense that there is no level of health expenses that could make it a good deal.
right,
Or
right.
um, cases where people give up an employer match or a retirement account, even when they have the right to withdraw the money the minute they've put it in, that kind of thing. Now, those very unambiguous mistakes are not the biggest crimes or the biggest mistakes. They're the ones you can prove. It's a little bit like, sending Al Capone to prison for tax evasion. It's not that that was his worst crime, but it was the one
Yeah.
that you could prove in court. But there were a lot more crimes where that came from with Al Capone, and there's a lot more mistakes than the ones that are unambiguously provable. But the point is, we do have a lot of evidence that people are not acting in their own self-interest. Now, the case for capitalism, the invisible hand, Adam Smith's invisible hand, is good at serving the demands that people express in the marketplace. It
Hmm.
doesn't know what people should be doing, and it will not meet those needs without some form of intervention. Now, look, you might say, can't we just educate people? People have to be responsible for themselves. They need to seek out their own education, and maybe at most, society should work on education. I would simply argue that we're trying hard on that. We're doing our best. I'm involved, but realistically, we're not going to solve these problems only through education. And so I am willing to intervene in the markets, but in a very hopefully thoughtful and constrained and sensible way that makes things safe for capitalism. This may be a little bit too much history of economic thought for most people to be interested in, but if I think back to the period right after World War II, the famous economist Paul Samuelson introduced something called the neoclassical synthesis, which dominated economics for decades after. And his idea was that he put it in a famous textbook. You needed Keynesian economics to stabilize the macroeconomy so that you could restore the functioning of classical economics the way markets would operate. But you needed a Keynesian frame to keep the economy stable
Fascinating. Yeah.
so that classical economics could proceed without collapsing. And I would say we might face a similar challenge now that in personal finance, we need a little bit of a regulatory frame to make it safe for financial markets and the industry to interact with people in the way that classical economics says would be happening.
That's a great line of thought. That really is a great line of thought. If I may, before we go to Steve, John, Ella, and Molly, one other quick thought from myself. Really about the if you like the interference of the big institutional players in what happens in the market from a policy perspective. I'm thinking particularly about your comments in relation to your observation, in my opinion, absolutely spot on, that the Australian way of doing super is far better than the UK way. You join a company, that company takes responsibility for setting up your pension scheme, regardless of where you then go on to move to, you effectively take that pension with you. Whereas what we have in the UK is the opposite of that. You effectively end up with lots of small pots in different employers. It's suboptimal. It's inefficient. It's riddled with unnecessary cost. And
Yes,
I was quite
yes.
involved with the auto enrollment market as it was being established in the UK. Um, it was very obvious to many of us that there was so much to learn from the Australian way of doing things. But frankly, what happened over here is that the lobbying power of the big pension providers didn't want that to happen. They didn't want that to happen. They would effectively lose the chance to sell a pension scheme to somebody if in the earlier years they went and worked somewhere else. What are your thoughts about the power of big institutions lobbying in such a way that it affects policy in a manner that frankly is quite obviously not in society's interest? Any quick thoughts on that before we go to Steve Conley?
It's a great point, and it's part of why, one has to be politically realistic. I would say that there might be room to try to persuade some big institutions to do self-regulation to head off worse. I mean, in other words, to sort of clean up the act to head off the mob with pitchforks, if you like. Um, we try to make that case, but I'm not sure how optimistic to be. It depends very much on the political context. But the sort of work that you do with your organization is, I think, very helpful because it puts pressure on the industry, and increases the chance that the leaders of big organizations will take a different view of what enlightened self-interest actually is.
John, thank you very much indeed. I've got some other thoughts about the trust deficit and the deregulate for growth agenda, which I'll come back to. But first, we'll hear from Steve, then John, then Alla, then Molly. Mr. Steve Conley, please do take the mic. Steve's a great TTF supporter. He's a member of our advisory group. We're doing some fantastic work with Steve, particularly helping people to um, recover from financial exploitation, for example, through investment scams and that kind of thing. Steve, please do share your thoughts that you'd like to with John and the other guests we have here tonight. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, John. So very interesting uh, conversation, very interesting material you have there, John. Um, I was going to talk more about the downstream human impact on ordinary people, because that's really kind of my area of focus. However, there's a few questions I have about what you've talked about that I want to kind of explore first, if that's okay. So the first one was about technology. Um, so yes, the technology is helping the industry, has potential to help the industry become more efficient and produce starter kit type products. There's also something else that's happening, and it's giving the ordinary person agency that they've not had before. So it has been the case, there's been information asymmetry, but that is starting to disappear. In 2026, it's likely to be disappearing quite quickly, so that there is less information asymmetry than there has ever been. And people are on a better footing to be well informed about the uh, the corruption, the complexity. They can use technology to see through the opacity, etc. And so they're much. So I'm very much my focus is in accelerating that process, so ordinary people can have more agency, and everything I'm doing, whether that's helping people who's harmed by financial exploitation, or helping those who have not yet been harmed but potentially could be. It's all about creating agency and giving people that ability to see what they're dealing with. That's the first thing I'd just like to say about technology. The second thing I'd like to say is about human capital. So there's also a lot of academic literature that's been coming out about actually financial capital is really not that important in looking at the total wealth of individuals. So in a developed nation, 80% of the wealth of the nation is actually its human capital and is not the financial capital. We earn 10 times more over a lifetime than we save. And there's often too much emphasis given to, let's say, the product, the starter kit. And if so, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal #1, which is to eliminate world poverty, is based on identifying human capital, leveraging entrepreneurial opportunity, and creating sustainable livelihoods to help people out of poverty. There's no product involved in that. It's just simply focusing people on showing them how to earn over a lifetime. And clearly, if we had more people who had earned and create wealth, then we can have a better industry. A lot of education misses that piece. So there's a lot of education, schools, education, employment that misses human capital completely. Yet it's the most important asset that an individual can have over their lifetime, financial asset. Also, I've been trying to persuade the industry for many years, and I was in the industry. I was quite senior in industry until my 50s. That fiduciary isn't bad for business, it's actually good for business. Fiduciary actually will give you a higher return on capital than non-fiduciary does. And you can see that if you look at the Nordics and the banking market value to book value of banks in the Nordics, which have a kind of more ethical focus, they do better than the kind of UK or US equivalents because they have more of a fiduciary focus. So there's a lot of misinformation in this arena. A lot of politicians, a lot of institutions kind of talk about things, missing the elephant in the room, which is human capital, focusing on becoming more efficient with technology, and hoodwinking people more than what they should be doing is increasing agency for the individuals and focusing on win-win scenarios for the public and the businesses in order to deliver better return on equity. And so that's kind of my framework. So I was going to talk about downstream human impacts, but I just wanted to kind of lay those kind of pieces out on the table, John, and I would welcome your kind of perspective on that before I take it to say any more.
Wow, you've covered some great themes, very important themes. I mean, a word on perhaps the first two things you talked about, Steve. So about agency, I agree completely. We need to promote human agency. And technology reducing information disparity. Yes, I agree it can in principle, but it's a little bit of an arms race. One of the things I'm quite worried about actually is everyone's talking about agentic AI, right? And the idea that you have an agent which is an AI agent that's very smart, that can do all the right things and shop and get the best product. Yes, it can, but who is the agent going to work for?
Yeah.
In economics, there's something called agency theory, which is how you make sure the agent works for the principal and not for the agent's own self-interest. I mean, who's paying the AI's electricity bill? Maybe the AI is going to work for that entity, not for you. And of course, when we talk about switching costs and the difficulty of changing from one bank to another, that it's going to take a whole Saturday, once you're locked into a particular AI agent that knows all your preferences and is the equivalent of your personal assistant that's worked for you for years, are you ever going to switch? And how can you be sure that the agent is working for you? So I think there's some real questions. I don't know what the answer is, but we have to be looking very carefully at the way in which technology is used. On human capital, I completely agree. But, one of the big questions is how to finance the accumulation of human capital through education, and also how to finance the creation of small businesses. You talked about entrepreneurship, but credit availability is very important for starting a small business. Sometimes people do that with mortgages, sometimes they do it with credit cards. But we need to ensure that these financial products are available in order to develop the human capital that I agree is so important.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, John. We're going to jump to another John, Mr. John Ashton, who's at York Uni, Professor of Financial Regulation. I think I've got that right, John. Please do chip in with any comment that come to your mind. Then we'll go to Alla Kobliakova and then to Molly Painter. Then we'll start bringing our conversation to close. I figure we're going to finish at roughly 5 past, maybe 10 past, folks. Thank you very much. John Ashton, over to you, sir. Thank you.
I should say I bought the book.
Hey.
I read it, John. And well done. It's ever so good. Also, just briefly say University of York, just so you don't think I'm Canadian, because it's excellent university in Canada as well, called York University. Well, to be honest, I thought the book was excellent. So and thank you for the talk. It's excellent talk as well. The sweep that you've done through to outline all these major problems in the first part of the book is tremendous and builds on all that really excellent work that I found inspiring over the years that you've done, particularly in household finance. It's been always very, very useful. To turning to the solutions, I suppose, is what I think everybody does think about, though. Is I certainly agree with the standardization of products, and there are examples of this. Say, I mention it because I was involved, probably, but say across the EU, the standardization of bank fees had a really positive effect and reduced costs in that type of way. Examples to draw, and I certainly do. And there is some standard products that have been introduced in the UK, so in the personal current account market, checking account market, as you term it, which are really useful, which I think have served some purpose. But when turning to the solutions, say the other things which were running through my mind, I suppose, listening to you here, reading the book, is one, financial regulation in most countries is really fragmented, and you have it introduced often bit by bit for a whole host of different reasons. Some of it relates to consumer law, some of it relates to more financial concerns. And this other issue that when we are talking to a bank, when we are talking to a finance company, we do feel that, well, we're so reliant on them. We do feel that they should be more trustworthy with us than perhaps other retailers, that other people selling things to us perhaps should, bankers perhaps should treat us with this higher degree of care than is there. And I suppose to link it to, I suppose, a US theme, say, this is the Ralph Nader point. I'm showing my age here, but do we need consumer law, or should we have more citizen law introduced? Should there be a higher bar that's needed here as well, do you think? But other than that, it's a tremendous book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you. But those are my reflections. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, John. John Y. Campbell, any response to what John Ashton has just said?
I guess I'd just say thank you for your kind words. I mean, I agree with what you were. I agree with what you were saying. So I don't have much to add. Perhaps we should just proceed.
We'll do. I'm just putting a note in the chat. I talk about the Hippocratic Oath. You know how doctors do no harm, etc., etc., etc. Maybe the financial industry should have professionals who, to be able to play on the pitch, must be wedded to some kind of professional oath. It's a thought we've often come up with within these conversations. Let's now go straight to Alla Kobliakova. Your thoughts for John Y. Campbell, please, Alla. I think we still have Alla with us.
Alla, you're muted.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me to introduce myself very briefly, just to give an idea what my interests are. So I have quite rich experience in financial area, working in not very popular country at the moment called Russian Federation. And then I changed my career looking at the academic part, and mostly my research area is about behavioral components, mortgage choice decisions, mortgage demand, and so on. So, John, first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for all your articles, including all your books, for extremely useful, theoretically based and future-looking findings and solutions and recommendations, which help me to develop my own work, which my students are using and my collaborators as well. And of course, a special thanks for this specific book, which provides an opportunity to just possibly narrowing the gap between literate and illiterate people, financially giving them an opportunity to understand the concept in a deeper, to the deeper level. I wanted just to share my concerns regarding the UK's market, because what happens in the UK, as you mentioned in your presentation, as you mentioned so many times, looking at the issues, the structural issue when actually the major part of borrowers simply do not have a choice when they are entering the contract, because they are enforced then by the system to remortgage very quickly after the initial period of a mortgage expires, usually typically in the UK 2 to 5 years fixed. And all the attempts to shout out and to raise the question, looking at the issue and saying, well, what could be done? in terms of introducing longer-term fixed-rate mortgages, which would provide more security for certainty in payments for households, and also reducing sensitivity to the change in interest rates for the whole system. No response yet. Also, this qualifying income when there is a question of remortgaging and switching to a fairer rate, because then a usual contract would be switched to most expensive standard variable rate, one of the major issues in the UK. All attempts to ask regulators to introduce caps and, realizing UK plus 2%, which would be fair rate, the profitable rate, once again, the answer has been it would disturb the market. So I just wanted to ask your opinion, how you see the future. Is there any opportunity to find a proper solution to make UK's market more efficient and more fairer in a sense, and just to move people from that kind of no choice, remortgaging, no qualifying income, paying forever expensive rates?
Well,
Thank you, Anna.
mortgage market design is a topic that I've worked quite a lot on, and I'm not. I can see pros and cons of the UK. On the one extreme, you have the UK adjustable based system, and on the opposite extreme, you have long-term fixed mortgages in the US, also in Denmark, and countries like Canada are sort of in the middle. And there's pros and cons. There's a lot to be said on both sides. What I think is, though, that within each kind of system, you should simplify. So in the UK, that means get rid of teaser rates. Just have plain vanilla adjustable rate mortgages. And in the US, that means get rid of points. It also, I think, means that the US system would benefit from having some of the features that other countries have to eliminate the lock-in problem. We're currently living in the US through a problem that rates have risen and people with old mortgages don't want to move, and this has gummed up the housing market. And it's an unnecessary problem because you can fix it in various ways. You can have assumable mortgages, you can have portable mortgages, you can have mortgages that can be refinanced at market value the way they do in Denmark. So kind of whether you're very fixed or very adjustable, strip it down, simplify it, and then we can argue about where on that adjustable fixed spectrum we should be. I would say consumer choice is a good thing, but people are used to the system they live in, and there's a lot of inertia in these systems. And so realistically, I would expect the UK to continue with adjustable primarily, and the US to continue primarily with fixed.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, John. Let's now jump to Professor Molly Painter. Molly, please do take the mic. Thank you. Oh, Molly's put a thought in the note, a note in the chat. She says,
yes, I thought I
John.
could just save time and put my introduction in there for people to read and just jump to the questions. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this excellent talk. Really, really enjoyed it. So basically 3 points from my side. The first one is an old question that I have as a business ethicist, and this is exactly what we can solve through regulatory change and compliance. And I wrote a book many, many years ago while I was working in Chicago, Business Ethics as Practiced, that showed the risks of compliance as a way for organizations to basically check the compliance boxes, but hide in the fine print. And I love the design thinking in the proposal that is being made. But I think we still face the risk of the purloined letter, the hiding in plain sight kind of challenge that often comes with enforcing regulatory change. I just wanted to get some feedback on that. And then when it comes to design thinking, how we can really represent people in a fair way in terms of what design would be safe and simple and understandable for them. There is, of course, the fact that people are vulnerable, and so without being patronizing, perhaps people need a kind of a paternalistic care. But being originally from South Africa myself, I'm aware that often these categories of design falters or has faults in terms of gender bias, cultural biases, and stereotypes that slip in, and how to really do a proper stakeholder engagement so that you really understand what people would need to know. That's the second point. And then the third point, I love your analysis of how, our good deals make other people's lives worse and create bad deals for other people. And so I was wondering about agency, whether we shouldn't also challenge those with the good deals to ask for more clarity on how their good deals harm other people, and whether that raising of the moral conscience is not also something we should be thinking about. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. And I agree that raising the consciousness that's part of what the book is trying to do. So I agree with that last point very much. And yes, there is this tremendous challenge of implementation, and we're aware that we write this book, we have these proposals, but how do you actually do it? I've been told this is known in the industry as the chapter 10 problem, that you're supposed to have 10 chapters in a book, and chapter 10 gives your solutions, but then the solutions are always inadequate, and that's the chapter 10 problem. I mean, I think, there's a world of people with whom I need to get in dialogue. In the US, that might be, for example, law professors. A lot of law professors are involved in the details of how do you design regulation, how do you design a law so that it actually works. And equivalent things, of course, in the UK and around the world. There's a lot of work to do. We got to chapter 10, but that's only so far, and then you have to take the practical steps. And you were bringing up some of the many very real issues that arise there.
Thank you again, John. And thank you, Molly, Professor Molly Painter. Great to have you with us, Molly. We're going to go to Mark Bannister, who put his hand up a little while ago. So thanks for your patience, Mark. Mark is another, like Steve Conley, long-established and very contributory member of the TTF community. Mr. Mark Bannister, to you. Thank you.
Professor Campbell, good evening to you. Many decades ago, used to work at Morgan Stanley, so I have a limited understanding of some of these matters. I apologize for the fact that I wasn't able to join you at the start, and I've had a slightly intermittent connection, but nevertheless, what I heard I found very interesting. I don't know whether you're aware of a chap called Michael Green or not. From Simplify Asset Management, but if you're not, I would commend his work to you very much. I think we've got a real problem, and I think your book, from as you described it, touches on it, but I think the problem is much more severe than you probably set out. And I don't blame you for that, because the rate of change over the last 12 months with the real advent of AI and all that it's going to bring forth is not something that you could have anticipated. And obviously it takes time to write a book, publish it, etc., etc. And I think it's taking us all by surprise. But I remember, and I want to tell you a little anecdotal story, if I may. Right back at the beginning of transparency in markets was the Reuters terminal, and it brought transparency to the price of foreign exchange. And when you had your terminal, you typed in the acronym FXFX, and it brought you up the spot rate of the leading 5 currencies. And I used to trade US stocks and in European markets for Morgan Stanley and so forth. And so I went along to the people at Reuters and I said to them, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could have the equivalent of the FXFX page, but only for all my US stocks, and I could input the prices and bring transparency and visibility. And I don't want it just for Morgan Stanley. I want you to provide it to all the other leading US market makers so that everybody, and therefore there will be greater transparency and recognition that that is a legitimate market price, that you can trade on it in depth, etc., etc. Well, 2 things came from that. One was it expanded our business by about tenfold overnight. It became the second biggest page and the second business seller and drawer of Reuters terminals. The marketing chap who I pitched the idea to, who was a lowly nothing, became the director of marketing on the back of it. And all sorts of good things happened to Reuters and to me as a consequence of that. But today, it was the antecedents of everything we have today. And I remember going to Reuters and making a pitch to them and saying, you should be in the trading business, not the market. You should effectively set up an exchange. But they wouldn't do that because they were terrified that that was going to take them into a place of competition. Anyway, long story short, today we have total visibility. You don't even have to have a Bloomberg terminal and pay 30,000 a year. You can do it all for free and get pricing that's almost as good, etc., etc. And you can trade on your terminal. And what we have created is disintermediation. And I suspect that we're going to do that across all of these markets. And the problem becomes nobody can earn a profit. The intermediary that has the traditional organization that has supplied all these products just simply is going to get competed out of existence. And I just don't know how anybody is going to cope with that. And AI is going to turbocharge that. There's one other problem that or two other problems that I really foresee, and I'd like to bring to your attention because I think they're worthy. One is we financialized everything. So everybody thinks that we make savings and we invest in our pensions and we recycle this through the stock market, etc., to invest in real growth. The irony is actually less than 20% goes to fund new businesses, etc., and 80% of it goes to financial engineering. It's simply loans upon loans upon loans to facilitate some form of financial activity that is unrelated to actual, making things, building wealth, etc. And while you have such a dominance like that, you're going on a road to nowhere. And then the other huge problem that we've got is simply demographics. We're dying out. And it's very difficult to see how you can have a really successful financial economy when inherently you've now got a shrinking demand.
Mark, we're gonna bring that point to a close. Thank you, Mark. Some great thoughts. I don't know if John's going to have time to respond to them because he's got to disappear.
He doesn't need to.
He doesn't need to.
It's for his next book.
There's your next book, John.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
I will bring proceedings to a close because we have run over. I think only because it's been such an interesting conversation, John. Thank you so much for stimulating our thoughts. I am going to make one final point. I put in the chat a link to the speech by Michael Barr, Governor Michael Barr of the Fed, from back in July. What he talks about is hyper important, I think, both in the UK and in the USA. He talks about the cycle of booms, busts, and financial regulation. He talks about the dangers of deregulation, how an attempt to maximize profit through ripping out inefficiencies and friction through regulation ultimately causes more scandals, ultimately leads to disquiet in the marketplace, ultimately worsens the trust deficit. I highly recommend that speech to everybody. And if we had time, we'd talk about it more. But we haven't got time. We're not going to talk about it more. What we are going to do is thank John Y. Campbell for his book, for talking about his book, along with his colleague, of course. And thank you very much indeed, John. We'll wrap it up there. I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.